In this lesson, we're going to spend some time looking at risk monitoring control. Our intent is really to be able to deploy risk management processes to really continuously monitor risks and their responses, as well as have the ability to continue to identify new risks that develop during the life cycle of the project. We are going to, in this lesson, cover topics associated with risk monitoring and controlling during the life cycle of the project. From these oversights in project risk management, again, we're just going to be continuing to look at these as we move through risk monitoring and control. None of them are really new to our unit this week, but just the awareness of making sure that our risk work is aligned with what our project is all about. Let's see, learning objectives for this. Remember, we've talked about this. Risk management is not a one-time event in the project. It begins at the start in initiation and occurs throughout the project. And it really is up to the project manager and the team to continue to collaborate to look at the risk work. So what risks are happening? Are we dealing with them? What risks have we passed by and they didn't happen? Thank goodness. What new risks are that we couldn't see before? Because remember, our project is iteratively and progressively elaborating. And what new risks can we see now that we couldn't see before? And have we planned to address those? So as we take a look at this particular lesson, it really is about the execution of our risk management plan. And certainly within the context of your organization, there are a few things that we haven't talked about yet, particularly workaround plans, working to build your risk reports. We'll spend some time looking at lessons learned. We've really talked about building and deploying, and then your organizational factors. So here again is the overview of the process. And with risk monitoring and controlling, as I mentioned, it's really where we're taking a look at identifying, analyzing, and planning for risks that we couldn't see before, keeping our eyes on risks that we had identified. Watchdog risks, the ones that we kept on a watch list, their probability, their impact may change, and they may move from just being on that list to something that we're actively addressing. We may have to reanalyze existing risks. Their probability and impact can change. Watching for those triggers, we've talked about that, to know when to push our contingency plans into place. And remember those residual risks, those ones on the watch list, we want to keep our eyes on those. And for risks that are occurring, are we managing them in the way that we said we would? So risk monitoring and controlling really is something that's going on through the life of the project. Many times I'll see project teams add a hammock activity into their work breakdown structure that is doing risk monitoring and controlling. So once we've put the risk response plan in place, it's an activity that would span the rest of the project so that we know that we are spending time to keep our risk work up to date. Let's see. Key work that we're doing during monitoring and control is to certainly take a look at our existing risks and along those existing risks to determine if the risk response plan created is still the most effective and what might be more effective, and to continue to look for new risks and also to make sure that risks are being managed during their plan. This is just an aside, but I wanted to take a look at where we've been. We really focused on the planning phase of project risk management. So taking a look at plan risk management, that was our risk management plan. And then as we built our risk register, we were identifying risks, doing our qualitative and quantitative analysis, and coming up with our risk response plans, and then monitoring and controlling is part of the monitoring and controlling process group. And we are going to move through that at this point. Let's see, also in just an overview of project risk knowledge area, you can start to see here the different topics that we have and how the output of one many times is the input for the other. So for example, out of plan risk management, we have our risk management plan that then becomes an input into our identify risks, also the qualitative and quantitative analysis, since it informs that analysis, and then into our plan risk responses as well, because we have talked about that. Also, part of your project risk management plan is to talk about how you're working to do monitoring and controlling over the life of the project, and so you'll see that as an input at this point as well. Just to talk a little bit more about the risk monitoring controlling group, so I've pulled this particular piece out of the earlier slide. Again, we see the components that we've been working on, the risk management plan, our risk register, approved changes certainly because we're looking at the risks there, and then our work performance information and our performance reports. That will move us into some of the risk metric work that we need to talk about as well. From an output, once the tools and techniques have been applied, the project manager is really left with a series of outputs that are mostly updates to existing documents, such as your register, your organization process assets, your risk management plan. We may find some lessons learned. There's a better way to be doing this moving forward. Your risk breakdown structure, your project management plan, lessons learned, and other documents. So while these updates are critical to the success of the project, it's important to remember to follow the integrated change control process established at the onset and complete change requests as needed to accommodate changes in the risk landscape. Recommended corrective and preventive actions will likely trigger change requests, such as addressing contingency plans and workarounds. And so it is important in your risk monitoring and controlling that you're really talking about that so that the expectations are set. Let's see, also again, looking at monitoring and controlling risk, it really is the process of implementing our risk response plans, tracking our identified risk, monitoring residual risk, identifying new risk, and evaluate risk process effectiveness. All of that should occur throughout the project. Project work should be continuously monitored for new, changing, and outdated risks, so things we don't have to worry about anymore. We may at this point use variance and trend analysis, risk audits, and technical performance management, so that gets into the metric piece. The purpose is really to verify that the assumptions are valid. Some risks are going to diminish or dissipate as we move through the project, and when this happens, then we want to keep those things up to date, changing the risks or retiring them, using whatever policy and procedure were put together in your risk management plan. For risks that have changed and for new risks, we need to make sure that things are in alignment there. And this goes back again to the risk response owner, or the risk owner should really be reporting to the project manager on the effectiveness of the updated plan, any unanticipated effects, and any corrections that need to be made. And they need to be recorded as well in whether it's the risk management plan, your risk register. And as part of updating the project documentation, we want to make sure that the organizational process assets for reuse, lessons learned artifacts, and risk management templates are all updated in addition to the project management plan. Some tools and techniques used in monitoring and control include risk assessment, generally led by the project manager with the risk owners and the project team regularly. Maybe this is something that talk about in your status meeting. Existing risks should be updated with any new information, and that should cascade to include updates to other components, the contingency reserve, your expected monetary value calculations, and other components. And all new risks should be reviewed with the same rigor that you've done with risks that were identified initially in the project. Audits should be performed through the project to ensure that the project stays on track, to make sure that the project is healthy. And the goal of the audit is to ensure that each process is doing what it's supposed to be doing. So we want to make sure we're objective because, well, the project's well-being may very well be at stake here. In order to do these risk audits, it's to assign someone to take on the role of the auditor. Ideally, the PM, the project manager, will be in charge of determining who should complete the audit with input from stakeholders at the onset of the project. So this, again, might be something that you've worked out in your risk management plan. There are some standard factors that are critical for a successful project. Again, this is based on the unique characteristics of your project and can include the project organization, project planning, meeting milestones, how well the project is being controlled, how well risk is being handled, and how resources are being handled, how we're dealing with scope. Part of the audit will be to check and see if these critical success factors are being met. And it's really done by gathering information from team members and also from project performance to analyze and determine if there are any recommendations on how to improve the processes. A report should be written, thoroughly detailing the findings so that everyone can see the results and understand what needs to be done if the project is found to be off track. Tools to support monitoring and control. So we have talked about many of these already. The risk management plan, that's really coming up with your process for how you're going to work. The risk register we've been using to document our risks. And then what's really important in your process is to know how you're using some of these other tools. So if a risk is realized, does it get moved to the issues log and the change log? Or does it stay in the risk register and it gets handled there? When changes and issues come up, do we have to examine them for risks? Also, we want to make sure that we are paying attention to our lessons learned. So what are we doing well around risk? And can we go back and inform our risk work in a better way through the project? What could we be doing differently instead of, more of, less of? I want to make sure the communication plan is enabling people to see the risks at the point in time that they need to see them. So if we are using some kind of a shared drive, what is the aging of that information? How often is it updated? Your development methodology may also drive some of how your risk work is done. If you're doing a more traditional work, we may be doing more risk planning up front and then monitoring that through the life of the project. If you're using a more agile methodology, then you're working to prioritize risks from the beginning, align your work that way, and in every sprint planning session, you're re-looking at risks. Also taking a look at variance and trend analysis. How are things going? Is it working to identify some triggers that we need to be aware of? The same with your metrics. We want to be keeping our eye on our reserve analysis. Are we using it up too soon? What are we spending it on? Are we not using it up and it's dollars that could be going back into the organization? And we've talked about using status meetings as a risk as an agenda item to make sure that we're staying up to date on what's going on. Putting it all together, risk work for the project manager and the team is really based on what was established in the risk management plan. So we really should be taking a look at how we are performing these steps. Recognize that these things need to be done, and in the risk management plan, in the risk monitoring controlling section, you're really talking about how it will be done. Taking a look at roles and responsibilities, what the specific deliverables are for these pieces. Again, it just reminds us that risk management is ongoing through the project and that we need to integrate these things into the overall operations work of what our project is about. Again, remember the iterative nature of risk management. It's not a one-time shot, that we are continuing to look for new risks. We're continuing to audit and review risks that we've previously identified. The phrase integrated change control specifically refers to a project management process that is implemented over the course of a project's life. And it's part of the integration knowledge area and is exercised in the monitoring control phase of the project. Integrated change control involves reviewing all of the change requests that might be submitted in regards to the project's organizational process assets, as well as to all of the deliverables that are in question. The groups and individuals that may exert some form of this integrated change control can include the project management team, the particular project management team leader, and other individuals who represent the financial interests of the financially responsible party, usually the sponsor. You know, it's important. I might be looking at a change in a design or a change in a build part of a project and think it's no big deal from my perspective, but it could be huge from an implementation or a testing perspective. So we want to make sure we're paying attention to that. The reason that we're mentioning it here is because as risks are realized, they may become issues and changes. You will sometimes need to make changes to the project, and when this occurs, we may be doing it through the integrated change control process. So the change needs to be understood as well as possible and its consequences before it is implemented. To help ensure that the changes are properly implemented, that's why we use this change control process. Also, as change is integrated into the project, it may introduce additional risks. We want to look at that as well. And so in your risk management plan, we really want to decide the process of a realized risk. Does it stay in the register? Do you move it to the issue log, the change log? There are some companies that I work with that their enterprise software automatically does that once it is realized. So it's really understanding what the flow of the risk is through your process. This is just a sample change request form. The fields may vary based on the project. One thing though I do want to remind you is when you're looking at a change, you want to look at the risk for this change. That could drive whether you do the change or not, how you do the change, what the estimate is for the change, and it also drives updates to our risk response plan. Just some other things, keeping the risk response plan up to date. We've talked about the importance of just adding it as a line item into each status meeting, delegating some ownership of that risk to a risk owner, that there's some activity in your detailed plan that considers the effort and duration necessary for doing risk work. And I mean, at the end of the day, we have to look at risks as a treasure, because if we can identify a risk and be proactive in handling it, then we are setting our project up for success. Many times team members don't want to share a risk with you because they think that, wow, that's a really bad thing. And we need to flip that around and remind folks that it is a good thing, because if we're finding these risks sooner, we have more opportunity to figure out what to do with them. Workaround plan, this is a PMBOK definition, and it is really just responses taken to deal with risks that were put on the watchdog list that we have passive acceptance for. So now what are we going to do? Let's see, just to close this unit up, I believe that we have spent time talking about each of these, but I do want to close with this and also with my oversights. I hope that we've spent some time talking about how you can address these pieces on your project. And finally, just a shout out to the text that we've used, certainly important in the risk work that we are doing.